Snow fell in sharp slants across the Mercer yard. The old patriarch's voice cut through the wind like a whip. He stood with his sons, arms crossed, eyes narrowed at the young widow before him. Hannah Mercer clutched 3 swaddled infants to her chest, triplets only weeks old. Their thin cries were swallowed by the gale. She wore the marks of sleepless nights and fresh grief, but her jaw was set. "You brought us nothing but mouths to feed," the old man said, "and not a one of 'em a boy. You'll not linger here. Take your burdens and be gone." The youngest son shifted, gaze flicking to Hannah, then down. The others matched their father's hardness. No neighbor stepped forward. Faces peered from porches and half-latched doors, then disappeared. The wind bit through Hannah's shawl as she drew it tight around the babies. "You'll not shame me into silence," she said, voice unsteady but clear. "These girls are flesh and blood, and I'll keep them safe, even if I must do it alone." The words surprised even her, yet they steadied her. She turned from the yard and stepped into the white blur of the road. Each stride sank to the ankle, each breath burned. Her husband had been in the ground since autumn, and with him had gone the only shelter these people ever offered. When her knees buckled, she pressed the babies closer. "Hush, my loves," she whispered. "We'll keep walking." The wind tore her promise to pieces. Movement darkened the drifting snow ahead. A wagon laboring through the flats. A man hunched at the reins, his coat rimmed with ice. The creak of wheels and the tired grunts of the horses reached her as the world tilted. Boots crunched to a stop. A quiet voice came through the storm. "Ma'am?" Hannah tried to answer, but the triplets wailed and her head lolled against a stranger's coat. Strong hands steadied her before she slid into the drift. He gathered her and the children with a steadiness like oak. "Easy now," he murmured. "You're safe." The storm swallowed the rest. Hannah woke to warmth. The hiss of a fire filled the silence, and rough-hewn beams stretched above her. The smell of wood smoke and broth hung in the air, thick enough to make her throat ache with hunger. The triplets shifted in a cradle near the hearth, their breaths even, their fists unclenched. Relief left her trembling harder than the cold had. A man stood at the fire, stirring a pot. Broad-shouldered, his face was cut by weather more than years. His coat hung from a peg near the door, ice still melting from the hem. He glanced over his shoulder. "You're awake." Hannah struggled upright, shawl slipping from her shoulders. "The girls, they're fine," he said, setting the spoon aside. "Fed 'em a little goat's milk. They took to it. You'll want to nurse when you're ready." She studied him warily. "Why help us?" "Because you needed it," he answered simply. "Name's Caleb Morgan. This is my place. You'll stay until you've got your strength." The words were plain, but they settled over her like another quilt. He turned back to the fire, and she noticed a small wooden horse resting on the mantel. The toy was worn smooth from handling, edges dulled by a thumb that must have traced it often. For a moment, Caleb's eyes lingered on it before he laid another log on the flames. That night, while the wind clawed at the cabin walls, Hannah listened to the stranger's movements, the knock of boots by the door, the scrape of a chair on pine boards, the low murmur as he calmed his horses outside. She pressed the babies close and let the steady rhythm of his presence work against the storm still raging beyond the walls. For the first time since her husband's death, she did not feel utterly alone. By the week's end, Hannah had strength enough to stand, though the triplets still drained her every ounce of rest. Caleb hitched the wagon and drove her into town for flour, salt, and kerosene. Heads turned the moment they stepped into the mercantile. Hannah felt the weight of every glance, the women at the counter stiffening, the men by the stove leaning in. Whispers bloomed like weeds in summer dust. "That's Mercer's widow, ain't it?" one voice muttered. "Living out at Morgan's place?" "She always was cursed," another said. 3 girls, and now clinging to a rancher. Hannah kept her gaze low, clutching two babies close in her arms, while Caleb carried the third against his chest. Shame burned her cheeks, but she refused to bow her head. The storekeeper hesitated, torn between gossip and trade. Caleb's voice cut the pause clean, calm but hard as flint. "Put her on my account." He laid the goods on the counter with finality. The whispers prickled Hannah's skin. She bit her lip until she tasted blood, holding back words that begged to spill. Outside, when the door shut behind them, she finally let her voice shake. "They'll never let me live it down. Maybe they're right. Maybe I don't belong anywhere." Caleb's jaw tightened, though his tone stayed steady. "Don't say that. Their talk don't change what's right. You and the little ones need food. That's all there is to it." The plainness of it steadied her more than comfort would have. He climbed onto the seat, reins loose in his hands, eyes fixed on the horizon as the wagon rattled out of town. Hannah studied his silence, and for the first time in months, silence did not feel like judgment. The gossip still stung, but under it flickered something she thought she had lost entirely: hope. Life on the ranch soon found its rhythm, a cadence marked not by clocks, but by chores. Caleb rose before dawn, boots whispering over the packed dirt floor as he stepped outside to tend the animals. Frost silvered the pump handle. Far off, a meadowlark tested a thin thread of song against the gray. Inside, Hannah fed the stove, shook out ash, and set a kettle so the cabin breathed steam and warmth instead of night chill. The triplets woke in turns, 3 small suns tugging the day into motion. She kept pace as best she could, rinsing beans, chopping onions, pressing biscuits by hand while one baby fussed at her shoulder. When the cradle went quiet, she mended a torn sleeve and pinched closed, a seam split along Caleb's coat. It steadied her, this useful work. The cloth remembered the shape of the man who had lifted her from the snow and made room in his home without asking for anything back. In the yard, a wheel caught a rut, and the wagon groaned. A crack split the end of the axle where it met the hub. Caleb cursed softly, more weary than angry. "That'll lay me up a day." Hannah stepped out, shawl tight against a breeze that smelled of thawing earth. "Maybe not." She knelt to study the brake. "My father used to bind iron over a weak spot. Rawhide pulls it tight while the wagon rolls." Caleb crouched beside her, doubtful but listening. She showed him where to set the splint and how to soap the strip until it would draw like sinew. "It'll hold," she said, and felt the words land like a quiet victory. They worked in silence. When they stood testing the wheel, the wagon rolled smooth as a creekstone. Caleb's gaze met hers. He didn't praise. He rarely did. But the set of his mouth softened, and something like respect settled between them. That afternoon, the wind rose, bringing dust that skittered like dry leaves across the yard. Inside, the babies discovered how to cry in chorus. Caleb tried to rock one while the other 2 wailed. He looked helpless, 3 pairs of fists flailing at once. "Seems I'm outnumbered," he admitted, an unwilling grin breaking across his face. Hannah surprised herself by laughing, a clean sound after months of tight-throated silence. She lifted the baby from his arms to free him, and then bent over the cradle, settling a small chest with her hand until the cries eased. The room softened around them. That night she stitched his coat by the fire. Caleb set a log across red coals, eyes catching on the small wooden horse on the mantel. His thumb brushed its smooth deer. Then he let his hand fall. Hannah watched from her chair, a thread between her fingers and a steadier one drawing through her chest. Pride, not only gratitude. Roots had started here, tender as they were. Weather could turn cruel again, but fair days came too. She chose to remember both truths. Near dusk, hooves thundered across the yard. Hannah froze at the sound, fear striking her chest. Caleb stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, his stance steady as the horizon. 3 riders dismounted, the Mercer patriarch flanked by 2 sons. Their faces were hard as frost, rhyming the fence rails. They had cast her out certain the snow would finish what their cruelty began. But seeing her alive beneath another man's roof soured their pride. Now they cloaked their greed in the language of kinship. 3 infants meant 3 mouths to feed today, but 3 pairs of hands tomorrow. Churning, mending, hauling, laboring. Better to seize them now than let them grow strong under another man's care. "We've come for the children," the old man declared. "They belong with kin, not under some stranger's roof. 3 girls'll churn, mend, and haul same as any. Better they work for my house than grow soft under yours." Caleb's knuckles whitened on the rifle stock, though his voice stayed calm. "They belong with their mother, and she's here." The patriarch spat in the dirt. "A woman's place ain't to decide such things. She's weak. You'll see soon enough." Hannah gathered the triplets close, trembling. Yet when the eldest son sneered, she raised her chin. "You left us to die in the snow. These girls are mine, and I'll not hand them over." For a flicker of a moment, the youngest son's eyes softened, as though her words pricked him. But his father's glare hardened his jaw, and he said nothing. "You'll not cross this threshold," Caleb said, rifle leveled now. The men muttered threats, their boots shifting restlessly. But they saw the certainty in Caleb's eyes, and after a taut silence, they swung into their saddles and rode off into the fading light. When the hoofbeats faded, Hannah collapsed into a chair, tears spilling hot down her cheeks. "They won't stop," she whispered. Caleb set the rifle back on its hooks. "Then we'll be ready when they come again." Sunday brought them to the church, a whitewashed box nailed together from pine and pride. When Hannah stepped through the door, the air shifted. Heads tipped, fans stilled. 2 of the triplets were wrapped in swaddling cloth and held in Hannah Mercer's arms, their small faces nestled against her. Caleb Morgan followed close behind, carrying the 3rd infant in his arms. The pastor, a thin man with a kindly face that kept losing its courage, faltered mid-verse. His voice thinned, then wobbled back into rhythm. On the women's bench, whispered stitches bound rumor to rumor. "Mercer's widow," one hissed, "living under Morgan's roof." "3 girls," another replied, "and bold as brass." Caleb stood beside Hannah, hat in hand, profile carved from resolve. His fingers brushed the pocket where the wooden horse rode like a talisman. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. A whisper rose louder than intended. "Corrupting a decent man," a woman said, folding her arms as if to bar the aisle. Heat climbed Hannah's neck. She tasted iron, the old flavor of words swallowed too long. The babies slept on in their swaddling cloths, oblivious. She looked at the pulpit. The man behind it looked away. Then something steadier rose in her bones. She stepped forward half a pace. "Better 3 girls loved than 10 boys raised in cruelty," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried. Silence gripped the rafters. A boy in the back sniffled. Someone coughed. The pastor's mouth opened and closed on nothing. At last he fumbled back to his text. "Let us, return to the letters of Paul." His voice cracked like a thin board. The sermon limped to its amen. No hands reached for hers at the door. The congregation parted as if she carried fever. Caleb did not step aside from her path. Out on the packed earth, where the sun made promises the air had not yet kept, he helped her into the wagon. "Maybe they're right," she whispered, the old fear kicking once before it died. "Maybe I don't belong in any place." Caleb's jaw tightened, but his voice was steady. "Belonging isn't theirs to give. It's something we build." Hannah didn't answer. She didn't need to. The triplets breathed evenly in their swaddling cloths. The reins creaked, and the church fell behind them like a shedskin. Shame had spoken inside those walls. So had her voice. And she wasn't the one who stammered. Sleep evaded Hannah that night. She rose from her bed, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and watched the fire sink to embers. The cabin walls sighed, with the wind pressing at their seams. Caleb sat at the table, the oil lamp throwing long shadows across his face. A book lay closed before him, though his hand rested on it as if holding a weight rather than reaching for words. She startled. "You're awake too?" "Couldn't sleep," he said, his voice low. His gaze stayed on the lamp flame, not on her. Hannah hesitated at the threshold. Then the words came, pulled from a place raw with worry. "I should leave. If I go, they'll leave you in peace. I won't see you harmed because of me." Caleb's eyes lifted, sharp but not unkind. "You think leaving will keep you safe? You and 3 babes alone on the prairie? That's death." Her throat tightened. "Everywhere I've turned, I've been nothing but a burden." Her fingers gripped the shawl until her knuckles ached. "I know loss," he said quietly. "My wife and boy lie on that ridge. Fever took them 3 winters ago. Since then, it's been silence." Hannah's eyes softened. "And you never thought of leaving this place behind? Starting over somewhere no one knew your sorrow?" His jaw flexed once before he answered. "I thought of it. Many times. But my wife and boy are buried here. I couldn't leave their graves to the wind. And now—" He looked at her at last, steady and raw. "Now I won't leave you either." Her breath caught. In his words, she heard grief as deep as her own, yet turned outward, toward duty. For the first time, something in her chest eased. Not safety, not yet, but the beginning of trust. Spring found its courage and came down the draw in water. The creek ran brown with thaw, shouldering ice into shattered mirrors and carrying them past cottonwoods just beginning to leaf. Hannah came with a pail and a length of line, the triplets sleeping in a cradle she'd nestled in shade and windbreak. Sun warmed her back through the shawl. The smell of wet earth rose like bread from an oven. She cupped water over her wrists to cool them and thought, for the first time in months, that she might be strong again. She was standing when a twig snapped. 2 men stepped out of the brush. A pair cut from the same board as the Mercer patriarch, though one was younger and his hardness hadn't fully set. Their boots were muddy, their eyes mean with purpose. "Time to come home, girl," the older brother said. "Pa says you've had your freedom long enough." Hannah felt the old weight drop back into her chest. She thought of the babies behind her, of the creek's cold slide around stone, of the wagon axle that had held because she made it hold. She stood straight. "I won't go back." The older one laughed. "Then we'll take what's ours." His gaze slid to the cradle, a hunger there that wasn't love. He reached. "Don't." The word came out steady. Hannah planted herself between his hand and the shade where her daughter slept. Her knees felt hollow, but the ground did not. "You left us in the road. You forfeited any claim." The younger brother flinched, something almost human flickering and dying in his face. "Pa didn't mean—" he began, but the older cut him off with a look sharp enough to skin. A rifle cracked. The sound split the air, and a crow launched upward in a ragged curse of wings. Caleb came from the cottonwoods, stance squared, eyes like hammered iron. "Step away," he said, and the creek seemed to echo it. The brothers froze. The older recovered first, fury climbing his throat. The younger shifted back half a step without meaning to. "Next step you take is your last," Caleb said. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. His left hand steadied the barrel. His right was sure on the stock, though Hannah saw the tremor caught in his knuckles. Not fear, restraint. A long breath dragged through the brush. The older spat. "We'll be back." "Then bring a preacher to tell you why this is right," Hannah said, surprising them both. "You won't find one." They backed off, muttering curses, twigs snapping under their heels. When they were gone, Hannah's legs gave way and she sank to the sand. Caleb lowered the rifle and came to one knee beside her. His hand touched her shoulder, not to urge her up, just to show he was there. "I can stand," she said after a moment. It wasn't quite true yet, but it would be. "I know," he answered, and she believed it. At dawn, the Mercers rode into the yard with twice the men. Voices rose in a tangle of shouts demanding Hannah and the girls. Caleb stood on the porch, rifle in hand, his figure framed against the rising sun. Inside, Hannah placed the triplets behind her and gripped the iron poker. She would not be dragged away without a fight. The patriarch's voice cut across the yard. "You've no right. Give us the children." "They're hers," Caleb answered, his tone steady as stone. "And she stays." The men dismounted, fury tight in their jaws. One lunged forward, but Caleb fired a warning shot into the air. The crack split the morning, sending horses rearing and men cursing. "I'll not spill blood unless you force me," Caleb said, rifle leveled now. "But I will defend what's mine." The oldest son swore under his breath. The youngest glanced toward Hannah. For an instant, doubt softened his eyes, but the patriarch's glare sealed his silence. The yard went still, taut as a rawhide rope. Breath steamed in the cold. At last, the old man spat in the dirt. "Rot here, then, all of you." They swung into their saddles and thundered away, curses trailing in their wake. Inside, Hannah's knees buckled, and she caught herself on the hearth. Relief flooded her, but unease lingered. She clutched the poker, knuckles white, until she realized she no longer shook as she once had. She looked toward the door, heart still hammering. Flowers might root in spring soil, yet storms or drought could tear them up without warning. The threat had not passed, but neither had her resolve. Spring deepened until the ground gave easily under a fingertip. Hannah pressed wildflower seeds into a narrow bed beside the cabin, yarrow, prairie coneflower, whatever the peddler's packet had promised the summer before. The earth smelled good enough to eat. Ants carried news along a twig. A pair of swallows stitched blue arcs over the yard. The triplets dozed in their cradle, a braid of soft breaths and loose fists. Across the fence line, Caleb set new posts. The work brought a sheen to his shirt and straw to his hair. Every so often he paused with one forearm resting on the rail, watching the cradle as though the sun itself kept time there. A dust devil stepped across the flats like a dancer, then vanished, and he nodded at it the way men do when reminded to be humble. That evening Hannah spooned stew into bowls and buttered the biscuit edges with the last of the good butter. Caleb came in smelling of horse and dried grass. He lifted one baby awkwardly, arms too large for so small a burden, and the child accepted his clumsy learning without complaint. The room glowed with firelight, soft now, not the desperate blaze of winter. Shadows flickered along the log seams. On the mantel, the little wooden horse threw its own shadow. Caleb took it down, held it a moment in his palm, then set it back, not as a crutch, but as a keepsake. "You've given this place life again," he said, voice low. Hannah looked up halfway to a protest she didn't finish. "I thought I was only a burden." "Not to me," he said. "You belong here." The words sank into her like seed into watered ground. She sat with them, listening to the domestic orchestra stove ticking as it cooled, baby hums, wind along the eaves. She had measured too many days by fear. Now she weighed belonging and found it heavier than fear. Outside, night gathered without threat. Coyotes called like a choir tuning itself. Hannah drew a blanket over the babies and thought of flowers, not just their fragility but their stubbornness, how roots held even when dust came or rain failed. She could be that kind of thing, she realized. She already was. Summer brought color back to the land. The triplets sat upright on a quilt in the grass, their laughter bubbling like creek water. Caleb crouched beside them, letting one tug at his beard until he winced. Hannah laughed too, the sound rich and unguarded. It startled her. She hadn't heard that sound in her own voice for months. Caleb looked at her then, not as a burden or a cast-out widow, but as a woman who had fought, endured, and still carried joy inside her. The laughter softened into quiet. The babies gurgled and clapped, but Hannah and Caleb's eyes lingered on one another. A strand of hair slipped from her braid. Caleb reached and brushed it back, his touch lingering a moment too long. His voice was low, almost surprised. "I never thought I'd hear you laugh again." Her breath caught. Instead of turning away, she leaned closer. Their lips met. Tentative at first, the warmth of his breath carrying wood smoke and summer air. It was not passion, but promise, quiet and steady, like the first root finding soil. The triplets squealed, almost as if in blessing. Hannah pulled back just enough to whisper, "We'll be all right." Caleb's answer was a nod, steady as the earth itself. He held her gaze, as if to say he'd known it all along.